All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into how your brain literally builds the world you see. But, maybe more importantly, we're going to talk about all the stuff it decides to leave out.
Okay, let me just kick this off with a question for you. Do you think your senses give you the full, complete picture of reality? Take a look at this. It's from a super famous experiment where people were told to count how many times a basketball was passed. Simple, right? But while they were so focused on that, a person in a full-on gorilla suit just walks right through the middle of the game. And the crazy part? About half the people watching totally missed it, never even saw the gorilla.
So that whole gorilla thing, it shows us something pretty fundamental, doesn't it? We can miss these massive, obvious things that are literally right in front of our faces. It just completely shatters this idea that we have perfect perception. What you experience isn't like a live video feed of the world. Nope. It's a reality that's actively being built, moment by moment, by your brain.
And that right there gets to the core of what perception is. It's not just your eyes and ears sucking in information. It's an active job. Your brain is constantly interpreting all that raw data to make sense of it all, to create meaning. It's the difference between light just hitting the back of your eye and you actually seeing and recognizing your friend's face across the room.
So, how does this all work? Well, you can kind of think of this journey of a sensation happening in three main steps. First, you've got the distal stimulus. Fancy term, but it just means the actual thing out there in the world, like a tree. Then, you've got the proximal stimulus. That's the raw info hitting your senses, like the image of that tree on your retina. And then the final step, the percept. This is your brain's final interpretation, your actual understanding of it as a tree. That last part, that's where the real magic happens. Right, so this whole thing, not being able to see something as wild as a gorilla walking by, has a name. It's called change blindness. And what it tells us is pretty incredible. We don't save every single tiny detail of what we see. It would be too much. Instead, our brain grabs the gist, the overall meaning of a scene. And honestly, it's a super important mental shortcut. It's what keeps our brains from just completely short-circuiting. Okay, so if we're not perceiving everything all at once, that leads to a big question, right? What's the gatekeeper? What decides what gets in and what stays out? Well, the answer is something called sensory thresholds. Think of it as the minimum volume needed for you to even notice a sound is playing. Now, to get really nerdy about it, psychologists actually have two ways to measure this. There's the subjective threshold, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's the point where you say, yep, I can't hear that anymore. But then there's the objective threshold, and this one is way stricter. This is the point where you can't even guess what the stimulus is any better than just random chance. And this shows this amazing gap between what our brain is secretly processing and what we're actually consciously aware of.
And here's the thing. These thresholds aren't set in stone. They're totally dynamic. They move. For instance, if I say, the dog chased the, your brain is already expecting words like cat or ball, right? It actually lowers the sensory threshold for those words. It's called being primed. That makes you way more likely to hear a cat or ball, even if it's whispered or in a really noisy room. Cool, huh?
So we've got this gatekeeper, the threshold, that decides what gets in, but what happens when something gets past the gate and then just hangs around for a while? Well, that brings us to another super powerful filter our brain uses, sensory adaptation. You know what I'm talking about, right? You ever walk into a kitchen and notice the hum of the refrigerator? But then, after you've been there for a few minutes, poof, it's gone. You don't notice it anymore. That everyday experience, that's your brain in action, actively filtering your reality so you can pay attention to what's actually changing. The official term for this is, you guessed it, sensory adaptation. And it's honestly a brilliant strategy. Your brain just says, okay, this sound is constant, it's not changing, it's not a threat, let's just turn down the volume on that. And by doing that, it frees up all this mental energy to notice things that are new, that are different, things that might actually matter for our survival. And what's so wild is that this isn't just about sounds. It happens with all of our senses. Ever stared at a bright green image and then looked at a white wall? It looks kind of pink for a second, right? That's chromatic adaptation. Or if you watch a waterfall for a minute and then look over at the rocks next to it, the rocks will look like they're moving up. That's motion adaptation. It's just a core feature of how we're wired. Okay, let's bring this all home. We've talked about change blindness, thresholds, adaptation, all these things that sound like limits on our perception. But I want to show you why they're not bugs at all. They're actually crucial, hardwired features of how we work. I mean, it's so easy to hear about missing a gorilla and think, wow, my brain is flawed. We think the goal should be to see and hear everything perfectly. But what if I told you these so-called failures are actually proof that your brain is doing its job and doing it really, really well? Because here's the deal.
These filters are absolutely essential. Without them, you'd be completely overwhelmed. We're talking millions of pieces of data hitting your senses every single second. By tuning out the boring, constant stuff, your brain can sharpen its focus on what's new and different. That sudden noise, that flash of movement in your peripheral vision. It's what allows us to live in a world that feels stable and makes sense instead of just being total chaos.
So, when you boil it all down, your perception isn't this perfect, crystal clear window to the world. Not even close. It's a smart, heavily filtered model that your brain builds for one main reason: to help you survive and be efficient. It's a curated reality. And that kind of leaves you with a really fascinating, maybe slightly unsettling final question, doesn't it? If your brain is making all these decisions about what you get to see and what you don't, what crucial piece of information might you be missing right now?